Good Friday morning. Welcome to this week's episode of Finding God in the Dark. I'm Don.
Hey, good morning. Or good good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This is John
Well,
Campbell.
all right. We've let this cat out of the bag before. We're not actually live on Friday morning, so we're
Yeah.
recording Thursday afternoon. Uh, that being said, this week's film, and God bless you all if you took the time to watch it because it was very long. I did
Mhm.
not know that when I picked it out. But we did watch Jesus of Nazareth in 1977. Franco Zeffirelli directed and produced, I think produced.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It was a mini.
um,
It was a mini series. Do you know what channel it was on?
I don't recall. It was a television miniseries in 1977. One of the things that struck me, at least production wise, about this was that there are so many prominent names in this film.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Actors that people will recognize:
Yeah,
Laurence Olivier, Anne Bancroft, Ernest Borgnine,
yeah,
um, James Farentino, James Earl Jones, Stacy Keach, Ian
yeah,
McShane,
yeah,
Donald Pleasance, Christopher Plummer.
yeah,
I mean, just almost a who's who of actors from the 70s and 80s.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, it was a well, I mean, I enjoyed it, barring the fact that Peacock insisted on giving us a multitude of
Commercial.
commercials,
Yes.
which irks me to no end because I'm already paying for the streaming service. Why do I have to have commercials in the middle of it? But that's an argument for a different podcast.
Yes. Actually,
Um,
absolutely. That's the rant podcast we do on Friday
that's that's
afternoons.
our that's our rant cast, yes. But other than that, thoroughly enjoyed the film. I thought it was exceptionally well acted, well produced. It, unlike the film we watched last week, stuck completely to the Gospels. There were a little variation here and there,
Yeah.
but was pretty much. Although interestingly, the scripture passage that I'm using to preach from this week, that I'm using this film to illustrate,
Yeah.
I don't recall seeing it in the film.
That's pretty funny.
Because the scripture is Jesus' lament over Jerusalem. I
Uh,
don't think
I
that
don't
was in
remember.
there.
Yeah, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
remember either.
I mean,
Yeah,
I was distracted on occasion, but I don't think that was in there. So,
no, I don't remember that either. Yeah, um, yeah. It makes me sad we don't have these kind of TV documentary or TV miniseries anymore. It's
yeah.
kind of, but yeah, I mean, I think it was a good retelling of the story. I enjoyed it. I liked one of the things I liked about it was it it took like a parable and then it built a story around the parable.
Right.
So it wasn't just like a story popped up. It was Jesus reacting to something and then he tells a story to kind of have this deeper conversation about it, which to be honest, I really feel like that's probably how he did stuff. I think that's a
Right.
better understanding of what he did
Right.
is you know you're treating this woman poorly and that comes into your house because you don't think she is worth your time. I'm going to tell you this parable about how people do that, and maybe it'll help you see that you're treating her in a bad way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was well done. And that's, credit the writers on that. That they took a little bit of artistic license with the gospel, but not anything that was really stretching your understanding of your faith.
I mean, one of the scenes I really enjoyed was his telling of where they did this is his telling of the what we usually call the parable of the prodigal son, but it's really about the two brothers. And
Hmm.
they did it really well because you have this group of people that feel themselves faithful Jews outside the door and they won't come in. And Jesus is sitting with people that quote unquote would be referred to as sinners, right? So they're the younger brother, and he's
Hmm.
standing in the literally in the middle, trying to have them see each other differently,
Yeah.
which which is I think is kind of a powerful idea of how he used this story.
You know, if my recollection, that was also the incident between, was it Peter and Matthew,
Yeah.
where he kind of brought them together, which I
It
thought was
was,
really powerful scene.
yeah, no, that's actually the scene. And
Yeah,
but he uses that story to do it, which I
yeah,
think, again, I think that's probably how he used stories. But unfortunately, because the Gospels are set up the way they're set up, we don't usually get this larger story going on. It's kind of
right.
most of the Gospels, for the most part, move from place to place to place and kind of here's a story, here's a parable. Um, but
Some more quickly than others. Mark tends to run, whereas
yeah,
others will
what's
jog.
yeah, what's Mark's favorite word?
And
And then.
then the Gospel of and then. Yep.
Um, so to me, I really enjoy that because yes, that some people would criticize it because it's not in the gospel, but I think it helps you recognize how good teachers use stories
Yeah.
and to have this to take something that's really going on in their life and then try to engage with the story so people might see it differently. And that's the whole point of teaching.
Yeah, and I would say, and maybe this is a little bold, a little brash to say, but I think that's what we do as pastors, particularly in what we're doing with this podcast,
Yeah,
is that taking stories that people know and
yeah,
relating them to the gospel, we're creating that bridge, and it was really fun for me to see Jesus do that in
yeah,
this film.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
absolutely. And I think to me it helps you understand. To me, that kind of stuff brings the teachings more alive. I think that's to me. I know again there are Christians that don't think you should have movies or things about the Gospels because this weird thing they have about idolatry, which is completely off the kilter, I would argue.
Yeah, yeah, I get
But
it.
I feel like what they are missing out is that new ways of telling the story open you up to new possibilities of understanding the story. You
Yeah,
know, paintings can help you see a story differently just by the painting because it makes you think about the landscape or it makes you think about the where people were standing or where they may have been positioned, and that's not something maybe you have thought about because you just read it or something. But again, films do that. They allow you to kind of play with this material in ways that I would argue open it up to better understandings.
yeah. Well, there you mentioned paintings. There's a gosh, if I can remember the artist, I know it's a prominent artist, might have been Michelangelo or somebody like that, who painted the scene of the storm on the Sea of Galilee with the
Yeah.
disciples in the boat. But if you count Jesus and you count the disciples, there's 14 people in the boat.
Hmm.
And when he was asked about that, he explained that he painted himself
In the boat.
in the boat. Oh, okay, that creates a whole other understanding of, being with Jesus in the storm or Jesus being with you in the storm, you know, which we don't think about because we separate ourselves because we just read it, or we heard it read or whatever. Um, so yeah, I think this film does that really well. I agree with you on that. It's
Yeah, and
and just a number of really powerful scenes like that just took what we understood, but just there was such an intensity. Now, I will draw a little bit of a little. I'm going to pick a little bit,
sure, of course.
okay? In that this film does do something that a lot of Western culture does with Jesus is that they make him blue-eyed and
Yep,
Caucasian.
yep.
And we know from historical, you
That
were going to
was
go there, weren't you?
that was my issue, and I understand it's 1977. I understand all that, but it does bother you when you're like, this would have been a great opportunity to introduce the American public to a lot of folks of color who can act, who could, it
Yeah,
could have been the time that you introduce that great Arabic actor that always is the third part in a role, and you're going to bring him up, yeah. So yeah, of course you want you want people to understand that part of what was happening was the Romans, who were white, were viewing these people that were brown and dark skin as less of a value. I mean, that was
Right,
part of the story, right?
right.
And I do think that part is sad. I understand it's 1977, but again, you could have done that better.
Yeah.
At least had more sprinkling of, like, none of the disciples are like none of the disciples are brown and black. Like,
Nobody. Nobody. And now look, that being said, and it was, it was a thing for me, and maybe my, I'm open up to that a little more because I have a daughter who's African American, I have a son who's half Latino, etc. But um that being said, the actor who portrayed Jesus, I mean, just
yeah,
he had the mannerism that we imagine from the scriptures. He had that piercing
yeah,
gaze and that
yeah,
very, I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
yeah,
he did it well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it's just I'm we have to remember, in our predominantly white
yeah,
middle class Western culture, that Jesus was most likely did not look like me
yes,
or you, that he looked probably more like someone who grew up in the
yeah,
Middle East.
yes,
And
yeah,
if you've traveled there, you recognize that people don't look like us. We stand out over there.
yes. Yeah, and I get that to some degree, but I do think it's a critique you can fairly give of, there was no attempt to really engage with the diversity of culture that you would have experienced if you were there.
Now,
And
maybe let's give Zeffirelli the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's playing to his intended audience,
yeah, exactly.
perhaps.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, again, my guess is this is a TV miniseries. They don't want it to be that controversial, and in 1977,
Mhm.
unfortunately, today you'd get the same thing, but in 1977, you definitely would have got some letters if Jesus would have been a black man or a person of color. You just would have.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I mean, there was a they did a live television event of Jesus Christ Superstar a few years ago, and that got pushed back because of some of the actors, you know. And to me, it was like, just do a good again, I'm going to say the same thing that I say to Disney all the time. Just tell me a good story.
well, what's funny is in because I think we're going to do Jesus Christ Superstar, right, at some
We
point.
are. It's on the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing no one complained that Judas was black in that movie. But
There
had
was
you,
some, a
yeah,
little bit. Yeah.
okay. But had you reversed it, you would have definitely got people complaining.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There'd have been, yeah. Which, again, I don't I don't imagine that Jesus was white or that he was black. I'm very sure he was Arab.
Yes.
But
He was Arabic. He would have
yeah.
been we would have labeled him as an Arabic if we would have seen,
Hmm.
or someone from the Middle East, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
He also would have been extremely short, most likely, and as he came up to hug us, his head would have nestled in our armpit. I mean, that's just the way it goes. You know. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Uh,
that's
what else? What else did you
well,
see here, John?
I thought it was interesting how um, they really focused on. I feel like they really focused on the theme of forgiveness. And I thought they did it. I know it's extra biblical, but I thought there was a very powerful scene with Jesus and Barabbas, where Barabbas is trying to kind of convince Jesus to kind of go on his side and help push this movement.
Hmm.
And and Barabbas at one point goes, rightfully so, lists all the things the Romans have done that have horribly hurt the Jewish people. And he goes, we're supposed to forgive them, and Jesus goes, forgive them all. Like, that is,
Yeah.
you know, And then I don't know how you felt, but I really thought it was interesting the tack they took on Judas in this movie.
Go
That
ahead.
Judas is this guy that kind of gets Jesus's message, but not totally. He believes Jesus is right, that basically he takes the tenor that, okay, Jesus is right. We're not going to win this situation with violence. We're not going to be able to kill all the Romans and send them home. But he's like, I think he's right about this peace thing and kind of and telling people to forgive and to love. But his vision is still this idea that we're going to convince the Romans to leave because we love and care for them, and we'll get our land back. And he's convinced all he has to do is put more and more people in front of Jesus, and he can convince the Sanhedrin, the leadership council of Jerusalem, and then they can convince Pilate, right? And so, and I just thought it was interesting this idea that because to me, Judas in a weird way fits in with kind of um, connects with this idea of who we are as followers of Jesus often. We kind of get part of the message, and then we want to cram all the inconvenient parts into the stuff we like or the stuff we figure out and then go, that's our Jesus. And then Jesus kind of busts open the box and goes, nope, doesn't work that way. Um,
Judas is always one of, in my mind, and in every one of these films, I think Judas is always one of the most interesting figures because you can take his motivations anywhere. He was supposedly a zealot, right? But was he, but he was still a disciple. So, did he want Jesus to be like the zealots, or was he learning differently? And there's all different ways to look at Jesus, or Judas rather. Um, Interesting story that brings to mind is my first appointment. I was the youth pastor in Woodbury, and we decided to do this Holy Thursday presentation where we did the Last Supper, and we invited people to come, and we served a meal, and but we did the sort of acted out the scriptures in the Last Supper.
yeah,
Now we wanted to incorporate communion in that, so being the youngest of the clergy involved, I was Jesus.
okay,
So I got to wash everybody's feet. Funny part, when you go to wash everybody's feet, they're going to take their sandals off, and you hear all this Velcro ripping at that
yeah,
point, which was hilarious. But later on, we were talking about it. Well, the senior pastor was not involved, but we had a retired elder who did visitations and stuff, and he chose to be Judas in the play because he wanted to actually eat dinner sitting with his wife rather than up front with the rest of us.
mm,
And so he was lamenting that at one point. We were at a staff meeting, like, well, I wish it didn't have to be Judas, didn't have to be the betrayer, or didn't necessarily savor that idea. And I said, well, there's a sense here that every one of us is Judas.
oh yeah,
Every one of us put Jesus on that cross. Every one of us is Peter in that we deny him at points.
yeah,
Every one of us is Thomas because we doubt him at points.
yeah,
And so you're just the pastor's name was Warren. He's passed away.
yeah.
A gentle giant of a man, loved him so much. But I said, Warren, look, we're all Judas, man. And he
Yeah.
goes, why didn't I think of that?
Well, yeah,
uh,
I do think, I mean, you can even see the Gospels. The Gospels give different motives for Judas because I would argue no one really understood what motivated this. Um,
right,
but
right,
I do think it's a more compelling, to me, it's a more compelling story if Judas isn't presented as this evil fiend kind of within the disciples kind of wreaking havoc. I prefer to think about him as I think he probably was, which was a committed disciple that lost faith for whatever reason.
yeah,
That that basically lost the idea that what Jesus was doing was actually going to work. And and lost the ability to just trust Jesus and go like, we're just gonna follow him, and wherever he takes us. He was trying to force the issue, and I think that was really what was going on. He was trying to force the issue,
Yeah,
and it was,
I get the sense you sort of in the same vein that he was this zealot who was enticed or lured by Jesus' message, and he thought that maybe his influence could bring Jesus to the zealot side. And when that didn't happen, he just reverted, you know. So
yeah, or
it's
you even
hard to
get
know.
well, even and again, that's stuff that we don't often think about. Is like, for example, in the Gospels themselves, we specifically have Simon listed as a zealot, not Simon Peter, but Simon, another Simon.
Right.
We have Matthew listed specifically as a tax collector. Well, those two groups of people hated each other, and the zealots would actively kill and try to kill tax collectors. And so it's a miracle that Jesus got them to see each other differently. In fact, I often argue that's his greatest miracle because, how do you get people both that one sees Rome as the great problem that has to be run off, and if that means killed, then that's fine, we'll kill them. And then the other person that goes like, you know what, I'm going to sell my soul and work with them. Like, how do you get those two people to sit down and to love each other and then to reframe how they see each other enough to love and serve and go in the same direction? You know, you
If we could answer that question, we
know.
would solve the political divide in this
I
country
know.
like that.
To me, I often tell. I like to talk about the fact that I like to read that passage and then talk about what I just talked about, and then I'll turn to people and go, and so why can't Republicans and Democrats get along now?
Yeah, I don't know, Jonathan. I mean, and like I said, if we could legitimately answer that question for today, we would certainly solve the
I I
political divide in
really
the country.
I really do think part of it is the church. At least we can keep going back to that story and asking the question.
Yeah,
Go like, how did Jesus do this?
right.
And then go, what can we learn from that? You know, how could we follow in that direction?
And I had a wise mentor once said to me that, you're going to have in your ministry at times you may have a couple, let's say, in your congregation who are divorcing, and both are going to want you to be on their side. And that you can't be on their side. And this is almost, I mean, this is exactly what Jesus did, right? He wasn't on either one side, but he drew himself closer to both,
Yeah.
which brought the two together. So I mean, is that going to work in a divorce? That's another question, but that's obviously what Jesus did. He drew closer to both parties, and in a way that brought those parties together.
Yeah.
Um, is that something, right now, not to get us off on a political tangent, but right now we don't even talk to each other. We talk past each other,
Yes.
which is exactly what's happened in the split in our denomination. We've
Yeah.
talked past each other. We have not talked to each other. But again, let's not go off on that tangent.
Well,
Stick to the
and
movie.
to go with your theory though, and to argue about kind of how we can practice this, right? Is what Jesus does is go to Zacchaeus' house, right?
Right?
He goes to Zacchaeus' house. Well, why is that a big deal? Well, everybody in the community hated Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector. They
Yep.
didn't trust him because they felt like he had sold his soul, right? And by Jesus, this
And
person
he had
that
a reputation for being dishonest. Yeah.
and but Jesus, because of his credibility, people liked him, people trusted him. It made them wonder, well, why would he go to Zacchaeus' house? So it made them have to ask the question, if Jesus finds value in him, shouldn't I? Or what's the value at least?
Right.
And I think that's part of it is recognizing as Christians, when we engage with people that disagree with us, we open up the possibility for other people that respect us to think about, okay, why are they treating this person this way? Why? What value do they find in this person?
Yeah. And you know, folks, if you want to, this is for the viewers and not really for us, right? But if you want to see an example of how that can be done, how those conversations can be had, I'm going to refer you on this channel back to October when we did Surviving the Election,
Yeah,
which was an awful lot of fun. And we've discussed doing something like it again. So that may happen again. We'll see.
yeah,
But that being said, what else? What else did you? Because look, I'm last week I needed therapy. This week I was just really happy to watch this
no,
movie.
I think in a lot of ways it is a very good movie. I mean, it is.
Yeah,
Uh, there's quibbles you can have, but and I really feel like they did some really interesting things. Like I like, for example, the phrase you hear it a couple times: "Men must change before kingdoms do," and I think that's a
yeah.
powerful thing to understand the ministry of Jesus Christ, right?
And is that not the whole hearts and minds thing, right? You
Mhm.
need to change hearts before you change minds.
Yeah.
You know?
And what I think is beautiful about that is it is not saying that injustice isn't important. It is not saying that we should not work for justice, but it's reminding us that racism is only going to be defeated when we defeat the evil in men's hearts. Like we
Right,
need to and should push against the structural problems. Absolutely. We should critique it and we should be active in the world trying to change things through legislation, through voting. Absolutely. But, but you have to also help people draw closer to God and change who they are if you're going to be able to live those new policies out in good ways.
right. Yeah, yeah. That was a. You're right. That was an interesting aspect of the film. Again, extra biblical, not really in the scriptures, but I think it does touch on the spirit of Jesus' ministry.
And then another example was Olivier as Nicodemus, where he is watching Jesus die on the cross, and he looks up and says, he's quoting Isaiah, and he goes,
Oh yeah,
"Through his wounds we are healed." And then he goes, and he gives a pause and he goes, "Born again." Because if you remember earlier in the film and earlier in the Bible,
right.
Nicodemus goes, "I don't understand this born again thing." And what's powerful about that is the gospel writers really feel like, especially Mark, but all of them to some extent, you can't understand the rest of it if you don't stare at Jesus on the cross. If you don't see that, you can't really understand the rest of it. Doesn't mean the rest of it isn't important, but the rest of it is illuminated in the cross.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was a great, not just a callback, but I think a tie-in, right? To take that well-known Isaiah scripture
Yeah,
and then tie it into Nicodemus's own experience with Jesus. That was it was really well done.
yeah,
Yeah. So boy, this is a film. I mean, we could dissect a lot of, and to be honest, because it is so expansive, and it covers the entirety of the four gospels and the whole story of Jesus. Um, we could, I mean, this is what entire ministries are based on, not just one
yeah.
podcast. So we could really tear this apart for a long time, which we don't have time to do. So, So let's talk, well, briefly about what we're going to watch next week. And if I looked distracted at one point here earlier, I was checking my notes to make sure I knew what it was.
Good for you.
And we've already brought it up today. Next week's film is Jesus Christ Superstar,
All right. Okay, cool.
which I had someone who saw, because I put the whole list of the films in
Yeah,
the newsletter just to let folks know, hey, if you want to watch them ahead of time, here's the films we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Um, and somebody said to me, but why not Godspell? I said, honestly, if I was choosing between those two, I like Jesus Christ Superstar better.
Me too.
Personal choice.
Me too. Me too.
That's all it really is.
Yeah.
I know the music better. I'm still enthralled with the fact that the Broadway production included Alice Cooper in it. So if you ever go back and listen to the Broadway the album of it, the Alice Cooper plays Herod, and so when he goes to Herod and they do that whole song, so you're the Christ, the great Jesus Christ, that's Alice Cooper.
Oh wow.
Yes, that shock rock Alice Cooper, that guy.
Yeah.
So, which for those who didn't know, he is actually a professing Christian. So,
Interesting.
uh, that's the right there. You go.
There
Learned
you go.
something today, Jonathan.
I did.
So, other than that, any other quick thoughts on Jesus of Nazareth?
You know,
Well worth watching. We say
it
well worth watching if you can tolerate the commercials, and it is
yeah,
it's a long slog.
yeah,
Slog's probably not the right word. It's a
yeah,
long film. It's two parts on Peacock, and it's very long,
yeah.
but certainly well worth your
I
viewing pleasure if you haven't seen it.
yeah, I think I also one of the things that I didn't want to let go is it chooses to really dive into the idea of Mary, Jesus's mother, as disciple, and I really like that. I liked being reminded of the fact in these films that she's the first disciple, she's the first follower.
Right.
And I think that's a really powerful reminder, especially for Protestants, to recognize that she probably did play that role. So,
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit when we discussed the Netflix Mary film several
yeah,
weeks back.
yeah,
So all right, friends. So that is where we're at this week. If you have watched Jesus of Nazareth, or if you want to watch it before I use it as a preaching illustration, you're going to be very short time. You're going to have
you
to
have
do
to
it two
start
days.
now.
You better start before this is published.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a big film. Next week's film is Jesus Christ Superstar. Friends, we're so thankful that you find these discussions interesting and hope that you continue to follow along with us. We're having a good time with it. So until next week, keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all next Friday. Take care and God bless.
See you later.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m., and we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.